Is Caldwell County today. My name is John Hawkins. I'm the director of the Caldwell Heritage Museum. With me today is Mike Gibbons. Mike is a Caldwell County native, a Lenoir businessman, and the chairperson of the museum's board of directors, and a person who's extremely interested in local history. Mike, welcome to the show today.
Thank you, John. I'm very happy to be here with you.
Okay. Our topic today is the history of the original town lots of Lenoir. And I understand that when Caldwell County was formed in 1841, land was donated by James Harper and Seth Bradshaw for a county seat town, and 48 lots were laid off that were sold at public auction on June 1st of 1841.
That's right, John. The proceeds from the lots was used to build a temporary log courthouse, a brick jailhouse with quarters for the jailer, and a whipping post, plus a new brick courthouse to be built in the near future.
And that land is what makes up what we call now downtown Lenoir. Mike, who surveyed and laid off the original town?
Edmund Jones was appointed surveyor for the project. Due to his age, and I think he was in his middle to late 70s at the time, James Clarence Harper actually performed the task. He was the nephew of James Harper, who had immigrated from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania a few years earlier. It is said that the streets of Lenoir are laid out in the same fashion as Gettysburg.
Well, Gettysburg still has a traffic circle, or a roundabout as they call it, in the center of the street, and the design of the town is very much like Lenoir. Mike, how did you get interested in this particular project?
Well, some time ago, my wife and I got interested in finding the history of our home on Norwood Street. That led us to a study of the Norwood Street area in general. During the study, we discovered that the upper end of Norwood Street had been surveyed and platted off in 1888 using a continuation of the original lot numbering system that the original town had. That study led to a desire to investigate the original town lot layout of Lenoir.
Well, what are the parameters of the original town?
John, the town was framed by streets named Boundary Street, north, south, east, and west. Today, the only street using that name is the one that was originally designated West Boundary, now simply known as Boundary Street. South Boundary Street is today called College Avenue, apparently having been changed due to the presence of Davenport College. I have not found the date that this was done, but it appears to have been in the 1880s or the early 1890s.
What about the northern boundary?
Well, the street that was designated North Boundary Street was apparently only built for 2 blocks. Today, it goes by the name Kirkwood Street, and it is only 1 block long, right there in front of Hospice. East Boundary Street was apparently the street that was known as Ridge Street, although there might have been a street planned about where East Harper School was built that was never built.
Well, what about the other streets?
The other named streets of the town were Spring Street, which is currently known as Harper Avenue, having been changed in the 1910s, Mulberry Street, Ash Street, which originally was spelled A-S-H, it now goes by A-S-H-E, Ridge Street, which was maybe changed from East Boundary very early, and Church Street.
Mike, I believe I've heard you say that there wasn't a church located on Church Street when the name was given to it.
Well, there really wasn't anything in the town at that time, and there were no churches in the town when it was laid out in 1841. The Methodist Church would be the first erected in 1846 on the north end of Church Street, and the Episcopal Church would come a few years later at the south end. It seems the planners of the town must have had this overall plan in mind when they named that street.
Well, what were the names of the streets in the town proper?
Well, the 4 streets leading to the central courthouse were all named Main Street, north, south, east, and west.
Yeah, that's very appropriate and symbolic, since the courthouse is accessible for all the people in the county from all directions.
Yeah, that's great. Today, both North and South Main Streets are known simply as Main Street. East and West Main Streets had the main drop from their name very early. The name East Street was eliminated in the early 1970s by being changed to and becoming a part of West Avenue.
You've made reference to a courthouse in town. Do we know the location and how it came to be?
We do know the location. The magistrates of the county selected the firm of Clayton and Lyle, who were contractors from Asheville, North Carolina, to erect the permanent public buildings. Ephraim Clayton was a master carpenter, and Samuel A. Lyle was a brick mason. They brought in many of their own people to work on the project.
But didn't some local people also help?
Sure. Leander Houck and Azor Shell were both carpenters. Uriah Cloyd and John Campbell, both masons, who worked on the courthouse and the various other buildings that were erected in the early 1840s.
Well, where was the first courthouse located?
Well, the large, square, two-story brick courthouse stood in the middle of the public square where the four main streets met. It was constructed of local brick made just outside the town limits. There are several pictures in existence showing this original courthouse, and I think, John, you have a lot of these at the museum.
We do, yes.
The front door of the building faced north, and there was a public well in the front yard of the building. In the center of the roof was a large bell tower whose bell rang out to summon people to court and to warn of emergencies. Now, I believe that that bell from the original courthouse is located on the front stoop of the museum today. Is that correct, John?
There is a courthouse bell there. Whether it's original or not, I cannot verify, but we do have a courthouse bell. Mike, the courthouse isn't in the middle of the street now.
No. Courthouse was completed in 1844. It served as the seat of Caldwell County government and the focal point of Lenoir for almost 60 years. By the turn of the century, the county had outgrown the old building. In 1904, a new courthouse was constructed on Town Lot 8, and the courthouse in the center of the town was no longer needed. It was torn down in 1905. Many of the bricks from the old courthouse are said to have been used in several of the buildings being erected in Lenoir at that time.
Okay, we made reference to a temporary courthouse a few moments ago, prior to the one built in the center of the street.
Yes, that's correct. There are many reports of a temporary log courthouse. The location of the temporary log courthouse is unknown, but it was probably located on one of the small town lots that surrounded the public square, either 2, 3, 6, or 7. It has been suggested that it stood on Town Lot 2 beside the charter oak tree. However, we now know that buildings were being erected on Town Lots 2 and 3 as early as 1841. Therefore, it would appear more likely that the temporary courthouse stood on either Town Lot 6 or 7, with number 7 being my choice as the most likely location.
We made references to the town lots by number, and the map that we have here will help our viewers to identify the location. And we also have copies of the map at the Heritage Museum, and we'll be glad to give you a copy if you want to come by. Mike, I suppose the best way to approach this subject is just to take the lots by number and talk about each one.
I agree with you, John.
Okay, since lots number 1 and 2 were both purchased by the same person, let's do those together.
All right. Lot number 1 was purchased by Lucius N. Tuttle for $525. That was the second highest price paid for any lot that day. He built a large 2-story brick store on the lot in 1841. It was later purchased by Robert B. Bogle and Cornelius W. Clark for the store of Bogle and Clark. This building is, parts of this building are probably the oldest brick building still standing in Lenoir, although it's been radically altered through the years. This is the side of pictures that you see that are, show the Charter Oak Hardware. McCormick's Jewelry Store was located in this building. Now the Central Barber Shop, and there was a restaurant there called the Carolina Cafe that is currently being remodeled, and a new restaurant will move into it fairly soon.
That's Cameron's Lunchbox, I believe.
I believe that is correct. Okay, lot number 2 was also purchased by Lucius M. Tuttle. It's the small lot right in front of number 1. He paid $310 for it. He built a large 2-story brick hotel there in 1841. It was first called the Tuttle Hotel. It became known as the Central Hotel, the Merchants Hotel, finally the Commercial Hotel. The building was torn down in 1907 in order to erect the Lenoir Hardware and Furniture Company building. It still stands there today. In the 1870s, D.M. Pewitt erected 2 buildings on parts of town lots 1 and 2. Both of these buildings still stand there today. One of them is the old building, stands immediately behind what we call the Courtney building. The other one is the building that became known as Lenoir Drugstore, having a false facade put on it somewhere in the 1900s, I believe. The Courtney building, also on these lots, was built in 1897.
Okay. Let's move across the street to lot number 3.
Right. Lot number 3 was purchased by Abel Shuford for $305. He had a large wooden building built on this lot where he ran a tavern and an inn. Now, a tavern at that time was a store that sold alcohol. And alcohol was sold here for many, many years. This tavern was taken over by Elisha P. Miller, who also ran it as a tavern and inn, until 1858. When Davenport College was built, the law said that alcohol could not be sold within a 1-mile distance of the college, so he had to go out of business. Then it became an inn and a store. In 1860s, during the Civil War, Green Moore moved over here from Tennessee and established a store in the old wooden building. His son, Martin Van Buren Moore, took over the store, and he ran it until 1882. In 1875, Martin Van Buren Moore removed part of the old wooden building, and he had a 2-story brick building erected on the corner of this lot. James L. Nelson purchased the building, where he also ran a store with Wade Cloyd. I think it was called Nelson and Cloyd, or Cloyd and Nelson. Mr. Nelson had a 3rd floor added to the building shortly, sometime between 1882 and 1900. He sold the building in 1907 to Lenoir Land Company, who turned it over quickly to Lawrence Henry Coffey, who later sold it to John Robert McNeary. McNeary sold the building to Lenoir Drug in 1920. Lenoir Drug sold the building to First National Bank in 1926. First National Bank had a little difficulty during the 30s and reorganized and became Union National Bank. Union National Bank merged with First Union, and after First Union built a new building in 1980, they sold this building to the city of Lenoir, who renovated it, and that is now where the city of Lenoir has their office building.
Okay. Glad you're giving us some of these modern landmarks, Mike, because I think that'll help our people to identify with it. But let's continue on down Main Street on the right-hand side.
Okay. Lot number 4 was purchased by James Harper for $495, which is kind of funny since this land had originally belonged to James Harper. Right. So he was buying his own land back. He built a wooden building on the corner in 1846. Actually, I think let me rephrase that. He built the building, I think, in 1841, the wooden building. And a little later, he moved his store, Harper and Waugh, off of his Fairfield plantation up to the building. Beside the wooden building, he had a smaller wooden building erected where the post office relocated from his home place. He was the postmaster here. In 1842, he had a house built on the southern edge of this lot along Main Street. His nephew, James C. Harper, lived in this house until 1859 when he moved up valley. At that time, James Harper's son, George Washington Finley Harper, also known as Major Harper, moved into the house.
He was a newlywed, I believe, at the time.
He was a newlywed at the time, that is correct. He had gone into business also with his father and was basically running the Harper store at this time. G.W.F. Harper moved the old wooden building off of the lot to the rear of the lot, and he had a new two-story brick building built there in 1859, where the store was relocated. The third floor was added to this building in 1867 for the Masonic Lodge. About that time, the building changed to the Harper store. In 1884, the Bernhardt brothers, Matthias and George, joined in ownership with the Harpers, and the store became known as the Bernhardt and Company, Harper Bernhardt and Company. In 1888, Citizens Building and Loan was formed and was sharing space in the building with the hardware store. In 1893, the Harpers sold their share of the business to George Bernhardt and formed in 1894 the Bank of Lenoir. So at one time, there were 3 businesses located in that one building. In 1902, George Bernhardt purchased the house on the southern end of the lot, had the house torn down, and he erected his new Bernhardt Siegel building there at that time. It wasn't called Bernhardt Siegel at that time. In 1905, Jacob Siegel joined in business with him, and then it became known as Bernhardt Siegel. In 1904, the old wooden post office building was torn down, and a new 2-story brick building was erected between the Bernhardt Siegel property and the Bank of Lenoir property. It's housed various offices. I think Western Union was in there. Citizens Savings and Loan moved into there. There were other businesses on the second floor of this thing. It was torn down in the 1970s when First Union National Bank decided that they needed a new building, along with the old Bank of Lenoir building and several other buildings. There is a bank located in that building.
Yeah, I believe we need to move across the street now for lot number 5.
Yes. Lot number 5 was purchased by David Corpening for $400. He passed it to Elijah S. Moore in 1852 without benefit of a deed. Then in 1855, Lucius M. Tuttle got it also without benefit of a deed. Mr. Tuttle had a wooden store building built on the property shortly after that. He sold the building to Levi Hartley in 1858. Mr. Hartley's son, Samuel, rented the store building out. Beside it, he built a house on the property, and he lived there. Samuel Hartley's widow gave the property to her niece, Carrie Harrison. A major fire in 1891 destroyed the store building and the house on this lot. C.B. Harrison, shortly after the fire, built a 2-story brick building on the lot about 1893. He ran a store here also. Later, the building housed the Western Auto Store, and then it became Peterson's Shoe Store. The building is still on the lot. The rear portion of this building, which was erected about 1915, was built for a movie theater. It housed first the Universal Theater, then later the State Theater until it closed down. The building sat there derelict. The theater portion of the building sat derelict for many, many years, but was finally remodeled and has become office building. Other buildings built on this lot were built in the 1910s, except for the building on the south end of this lot. The building that is not currently known as the Blue Arcade, the front portion was built about 1880 as a drugstore.
Mike, you made reference to a fire there, and thanks to you, I did a newspaper article about that some time ago, about that fire of 1891 that did destroy that entire city block. Well, let's move on now to lots 6 and 7, the small lots on what is the northeast and the southeast corner of the present town square.
Okay. Lot number 6 was also purchased by David Corpening for $270. He assigned it to Allen Contley, then it was assigned to Robert R. Wakefield. Mr. Wakefield built a wooden store building in the early 1850s. He rented it to Gus Westman, who ran a store here. Gus finally ended up purchasing the property. This building also burned in 1891. Wade Cloyd bought the property and erected a building on the corner there in 1892, a building that Teague Furniture occupied for many, many years. The building right beside that, between the building on the corner and the theater building, was built about 1907. Town Lot 7 was purchased by Peter Ballou for $225. This is the lot that I believe that the old temporary log courthouse was located on. He sold the lot in the old building to Joseph M. Bogle and Wiley Gaither. They used the old wooden building as a store called Bogle and Gaither's Store. In 1884, a major fire destroyed most of this entire block and all of the old wooden buildings that were in the block. After the fire, a two-story brick building was built here about at the end of 1884. The building became known as the Gene Miller Store and later Lee and Robbins. The building just beside this, or the buildings just beside it, where Duke Power was at one time and the building called the Hedrick Building, were built in the 1910 to 1920.
Remember very well those buildings and those businesses being there when I was a child coming to town in the 50s particularly. But lots number 8 and 9 are probably lots that every Caldwell County citizen knows about anyway.
Sure. Lot number 8 was purchased by Peter Ballou, and he paid the largest price for any lot of $530. He erected a wooden store building here, which he ran. Then he built his house on this lot where he lived. It later became the property of his son, John G. Ballou, who also ran a store. The big fire of 1884 destroyed the store building and the house. The Ballou heirs didn't build anything back on the property that I can find, but in 1901, they sold this lot to Caldwell County where the new courthouse was erected.
The present-day courthouse.
The present-day courthouse, the older portion of the present-day courthouse. Lot number 9 was purchased by Mr. W. Allen for $300. This was either J. Warren Allen or his brother Wesley L. Allen. Both men were present at the auction, so it could have been either one of them. Mr. Allen assigned the lot to Peter Johnson, who erected a wooden grog shop or tavern on the property that operated until 1858, when Davenport forced it to be closed down. In 1869, the property was sold to J.G. Ballou. He tore down the old wooden building and erected a large dwelling house on the lot where he lived. After his death, the property was rented out. It housed at one time Miss Marley's tea room. The house was torn down and became the site where the Avon Theater was built. The Lenoir News Topic was located on the rear of this property back on Mulberry Street. Lenoir Chamber of Commerce was here, and there was a filling station on the corner. Now it is the new wing of Caldwell County Courthouse.
Right. Lots number 10, 11, 12, and 13 are visible locations if one comes downtown Lenoir from the north by way of Main Street.
Yes, that's right. Lot 10 was purchased by W. Allen for $250. By 1859, the county had regained ownership of this lot and sold it to Mr. John S. Small, who was a saddler. That is, he made saddles. He operated his business and also had his house on the lot. His heirs sold the property to the town of Lenoir. This is where the Lenoir Graded School was built. It later, in the 1920s, was sold to the First Baptist Church, where their sanctuary now stands. Lot number 11 was purchased by James Dixon for $150. It was assigned to James Harper. About 1843, he built Hillside Cottage on this lot. Hillside Cottage still stands and is probably the oldest structure that still is unaltered in the city of Lenoir. although it no longer stands on Town Lot 11.
Right, and that's the office of RSVP currently.
Correct. Okay, Town Lot 12, Elisha Stone Moore purchased it for $150. He assigned it to Calvin C. Jones. This lot became the backyard or part of the yard of the Dr. Andrew Scroggs house. Then James L. Nelson, his Dr. Scroggs' son-in-law, lived in the house. The A&P grocery store was built here, I think, in the late 40s or early 50s. The building still stands there. That was the A&P. Town Lot 13 was purchased by Edmund W. Jones for $260. It was also assigned to Calvin C. Jones. This is where the Dr. Scroggs house was built in the 1850s, and it was built by Dr. Andrew Scroggs. Later was the home of James L. Nelson. The last known building to be there was Rainey's Gulf Station, which was torn down a few years ago, and it's now a parking lot, I believe, of the Methodist Church.
What about lot number 14?
Lot 14 is a very interesting lot. It's on the northwestern part of the first block of Main Street, directly across from the courthouse annex. It was purchased by E. Jones, probably Edmund Jones, for $260. He assigned it to William Davenport. This lot, along with Town Lot 1 and maybe a portion of Town Lot 2, contain more old buildings or buildings that were built prior to 1900 than any other location in Lincoln.
That's interesting. Well, lots number 15, 16, and 17 proceed down on the right side of Main Street, crossing what is now Harper Avenue to College Avenue.
Town Lot 15 was purchased by Albert Hagler. It's now Hagler, H-A-I-G-L-E-R, for $265. About 1841, he built a large two-story log house on the corner of the lot. This house stood on the corner until the middle 1920s, when it was torn down for the new Belk's department store. The buildings built beside that, and there are three of them there. Two of them have been recently remodeled, were built in 1902 by Dr. Kent. Dr. Kent had a drugstore in the building that later became the Wallace Dime Store building. Town Lot 16 was purchased by James F. Dixon for $290. This lot first had the Abernathy Livery Stable on it, which was a large wooden structure. It was gone by 1900. Early in the 1900s, there were store buildings built along this lot. It, at one time, housed the Lenoir City Hall, the Lenoir Fire Department, and the Lenoir Police Department were all on this lot. All of that has been torn down, and now it is mostly a parking lot, except for the one building that had Heinz Music Store in it, I believe. Town Lot 17 was purchased by E.P. Miller for $200. He gave this lot to the Episcopalians, where they built their church in 1851. Parts of this church are still there, although it has been greatly altered through the years and was even completely turned around at one time.
Now, across the street on the left side of Main Street, we found lots numbers 18, 19, and 20.
Right. Lot number 18 was purchased by David Orpening for $285. He assigned it to Joseph B. Gaines, who built a house on the lot. Later, Samuel Hartley owned it and rented out the house. The Kaysen family, and Dr. Kaysen came here as one of the presidents of Davenport College, they lived here for several years. The daughters ran a school here. The Masonic Lodge was built on this lot in 1901, and it still stands there. Other buildings around it followed. In behind the Masonic Lodge is an interesting old building. It was built in the late 19-teens. One time, Irvin Smith had his Ford dealership here in the 1930s before he moved out to Smith Crossroads.
That's where Ace Hardware is now, I believe.
Ace Hardware is located there now. That is correct. Lot 19 This lot was reserved by the county. It's where the first jailhouse and whipping post was erected. We mentioned the whipping post. Actually, it was there and it was utilized as a whipping post. This lot also contained the Pioneer Library, which stood on the Mulberry Street corner for many, many years. Later, there were two gas stations or service stations, one on each corner of this lot. All of this was torn down to become the new Citizens Savings and Loan Building, which later became CCB, and now it's called SunTrust Bank. Lot number 20 was purchased by W.A. Lenoir for $176. Dr. James M. Spainhauer built his house on this lot on the Mulberry Street side, and he had an office on the Main Street side. All of this was torn down also to make way for the Citizens Savings and Loan, which is now SunTrust.
I'm sure many of us remember the quaint little building that he used as an office that stood there, I guess, until the 1960s. And I believe it has been moved out on the Tom Dooley Road by Margaret Martine, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe that is correct.
Okay. We're now moving away from Main Street to look at some of the other areas, and lots 21 through 26, I believe, fronted on Mulberry Street.
Correct. Lot 21 was purchased by Wesley Allen for $130. He assigned it to H.N. Miller. This lot was mostly residential, had several houses along Mulberry Street for years and years. It is now the part of the parking lot of the First Baptist Church, and it is the site of the Hillside Cottage that has been moved to a portion of this lot. Lot 22 was purchased by Robert Shell for $114. It was also largely residential. Dr. Thomas P. Dean had a large two-story house on this lot at one time. In 1964, the county purchased it and built what would be the third county jail, or it's the one that's still there and utilized as the holding cells, I believe, for the court system. Lot 23, Levi Huffman paid $180 for it. It was residential for many years. Then there were buildings built here. Blue Ridge Electric had their office along this area in the 1940s. Lot 24, Alan Conley paid $200 for. The Hinkle Livestock Company erected a large wooden livestock company where they kept horses, mules, and sold buggies. It was almost destroyed in the Great Fire of 1891, right, but they were able to save it, but it convinced them that they needed to get rid of the old wooden building. So in 1907, the Hinkle Livestock Company tore the old wooden building down and erected a large three-story building. It still stands there today. It's now the W.E. Shaw Furniture Company building. One time it housed the Opera House, which was the meeting place of Lenoir, where they had plays, and actually the first silent movies were shown there. I think there was even a skating rink up there.
I've heard that too, yes.
Beside it was where Lenoir had their fire station, and there are pictures of the old fire station, right, and also Lenoir Town Hall was located here in the early part of the century.
And Mike, we have a good picture of that street at the Heritage Museum.
Right. After the demise of Horse and Buggy, Caldwell Motor Company occupied the building for many, many years until I think the Depression got them. Then it became W.E. Shaw Furniture Company. Town Lot 25 was purchased by Tillman Moore for $160. He assigned the lot to Sidney P. Dula. Mr. Dula built a house here in 1848. In 1854, he sold the house to the Methodist Church to use as a parsonage, and they utilized it until 1875. The house was finally torn down, and I think brick buildings were built along here. Some of them still stand. And Lot 26 was also purchased by Tillman Moore for $171. He assigned it to James P. Stamey. A house was built here on the corner that became the home of Wade Cloyd, who was a brother-in-law of Mr. Harper, J.G.W. Harper,
GWF.
GWF Harper.
Yes, they married sisters,
Right,
right.
they married sisters, right. The house was torn down, and the SO, or Standard Oil Company, erected a service station here, and there are several pictures of that old service station. It stood there on the corner for many, many years. It's now the home of Kincaid Insurance Company.
Well, lots number 27 and 28 also front on Mulberry, but we probably need to discuss them in conjunction with lots 29 and 30 that do not front on Mulberry, but they're kind of one entity.
Yes, that is correct, John. Lot 27 was purchased by W.A. Lenoir for $199. This lot was known as, interestingly, as the signpost lot, and it seemed, I think it was where the two of the main streets came together, which would be the road that came in from Statesville, the road that came in from Lincoln, met right near this lot. It was assigned to James P. Stamey, then to Lucius M. Tuttle, and finally to G.W.F. Harper. This lot, along with lots 28, 29, and 30, are where Major Harper built his new home, Sweetbriar, in 1872. Later became the home of Matthias Bernhardt, who was Mr. Harper's son-in-law. In the 1940s, the Bernhardt house was torn down, and the city leased the property, and they erected a park here called the Major Harper Park of the city of Lenoir. I never knew it as that. When I was a lad growing up, I always just called it the Lenoir Park, and that's where we played for many, many years. And it was a beautiful, beautiful park. Town Lot 28 was purchased by Elisha P. Miller for $125. He assigned it to Andrew Warlick, who built a small house on the lot. The house was rented for several years by Elijah Reed. Lucius Tuttle was assigned this lot. Then it came to G.W.F. Harper, who tore down the little house in order to erect his much bigger house. Lot 29, E.P. Miller paid $112. It was also assigned to John A. Warlick in 1850. He sold the lot to James L. Heelan in 1855. James Harper purchased this lot from Mr. Heelan in 1856, and he gave it to his son in order to put it together for the building of his house. Lot number 30 was purchased by William B. Lane for $76. He assigned it to E.P. Miller, then to James L. Heelan. Then it came to a man named H.H. Hewitt, P-E-O-U-T, I believe, who was one of the presidents of Davenport College. Finally, it came to G.W.F. Harper. Matthias Bernhardt had a house built on the rear of this lot for his son George, whose widow gave the house to the Caldwell County Library for their new building in 1956.
Now, lots number 31 and 40 were located on Reed Street, so I'm going to let you tell about them in one fell swoop.
Okay. Lot 31 was purchased by Robert G. Tuttle for $161. This is the lot that the current Lenoir Fire Station occupies. There wasn't much on there until the time that the fire station was built, although right beside it, I think Model Laundry had a building at one time. Lot 32 was purchased by Charles M. Dixon for $101. It was assigned to James L. Heelan. Again, I don't really know of much that was there, maybe a house. It's currently the back parking lot from the fire department. Town Lot 33 was purchased by James C. Horton for $99. He assigned it to David E. Horton. It currently houses the U.S. Post Office, the new post office. Town Lot 34, purchased by Lucius M. Tuttle for $180. I don't really have much to say about that lot. Lot 35, Avery M. Powell paid $115. He built a two-story dwelling on the house that later belonged to Wiley Gaither. Parts of this house are part of the second oldest structure still standing within the original town lot of Lenoir. And I never can remember the name of that
Morning Song Gallery.
Morning Song Gallery, John, that is correct. Part of Morning Song Gallery contains a portion of this old house. Town Lot 36 was purchased by Warren Allen for $80. It was assigned to Wiley Gaither. Town Lot 37 was purchased by A.C. Williamson for $75. It was later assigned to James Harper. It is now a parking lot. Town Lot 38, A.C. Williamson, and A.C. Williamson was one of, I think, the first lawyer in the town of Lenoir, for $50. It was also assigned to James Harper and is parking. Town Lot 39 was Charles M. Dixon, who paid $31 for it. It was assigned to James L. Heelan. Town Lot 40, Charles M. Dixon paid $26 for. This lot was also assigned to James L. Heelan. Now you notice that most of these lots didn't have much of a high price on them. They lay across what was called the Great Ditch or the Great Divide, which was a creek that ran down and crossed East Avenue. And prior to about 1875, it was very difficult to get across that ditch. You had to go either way up north or come way down south to get around. So these were not the most valuable lots. Did I cover Lot 40?
I think you did, and then the last lots that we have are 41 through 48, and they were on Church Street.
Okay. Town Lot 41 was purchased by McCaleb Coffey for $90. He assigned it to William Davenport. William Davenport gave this lot to the Methodist Church, and this is where they built their first building in 1846. The old church building stayed there for many, many years. It became known as the Graham Apartments. The Methodist Church finally tore the Graham Apartments down in the 1960s, I believe, for parking. Town Lot 42 was purchased by either C. or E. Jones for $121. It was assigned to William Davenport. It is the current home of the First Methodist Church. Town Lot 43, also purchased by C. or E. Jones for $135, again assigned to William Davenport. This is the lot that Dula Hospital was built on, and the old agricultural building, which had the library on the second floor. The Dula Hospital building has been torn down, but the old ag building is still there. Right. Town Lot 44 was reserved for James Harper, then assigned to William Davenport. William Davenport built a two-story brick hotel here called the Mansion House Hotel. It later became known as the Jones House Hotel, and finally the Watauga Boarding House. We have pictures, I think, in the museum showing the old Watauga Boarding House standing on this lot. It was torn down in the 1920s. Now there are store buildings on this lot. Town Lot 45, George Conley paid $285 for. He built a small house on this lot about 1842. In 1852, Sidney P. Dula purchased the house. In 1854, he sold it to Robert B. Bogle for his residence. In 1869, Mr. Bogle sold the house to Mrs. Emma Harper Silly, the wife of Clinton A. Silly, who was one of our first mayors, I believe. And they lived there. In 1886, they were getting ready to move to Hickory. They sold the house to Joseph C. Newland for his residence. In the middle 1910s, the house was moved from this lot down to a lot just outside of the old town limits. The Newlands had a two-story brick building erected on the corner. He ran a store here. Hugh Newland ran a store here for many, many years. In 1920, the building was sold to Eford's department store chain. In 1964, the Eford building, along with the buildings beside it, which housed the two dime stores, Roses and Eagles, were torn down for the new Belk department store building. In 1979, Belk sold their building to Caldwell County, where the Caldwell County Office Building is located. Town Lot 46. Albert E. Hagler purchased this for $126. It was assigned to E.P. Miller and to Mrs. Emma Harper Silly in 1871. Silly sold it to Joseph Newland at the same time he bought the front lot. Joseph Newland gave the lot to his son William C. Newland in 1886. He built a house on the Harper Avenue side of this lot. He lived on it for many, many years. He also built a house on the corner, which he rented out. H.W. Courtney purchased the lot in 1924. He tore down the old rental house and sold the property to the Smithies chain, where they built their building in 1934. Other things that were here, the old building that was once a cab stand and a filling station currently still stands there, and I think is going to be saved, if I'm not mistaken. Right behind it, Danny McLean had his office building, which will soon be torn down. Town Lot 47, McCaleb Coffey paid $110 for. He sold this lot to the First Baptist Church in 1889. They built their first sanctuary here there. This is the lot that housed the Blackweller Hospital. Town Lot 48, the final lot, was purchased by Abraham Sudworth Jr. for $155. It was assigned to Neo G. Bradford, who had a two-story house built here in 1855. This house housed the presidents of Davenport College many, many years.
Mike, I believe we said that the land was transferred by auction, and was it on June 1st, is that right?
The auction was held June the 1st, 1841. That's correct.
Right, about 3 months after the county was formed.
Correct.
Okay. Do we have any idea what was here? Was there a village here? Was there anything here prior to the town of Lenoir?
My understanding from some of the writings that have been done by these older people, the land that became Lenoir had nothing. It was mostly trees, scrub pines, maybe a few fields that had been cultivated in the past, but were probably not in cultivation during the time that we're talking about. We're some distance away from James Harper's Fairfield plantation, and of course he owned the majority of the land, so this would be at the extreme eastern edge of his plantation. It was not really, the Tuckers were gone at this time and had not cultivated it, and Mr. Bradshaw, who gave part of the land, I don't think was using it for anything, and the Norwoods. It was pretty far away from their property. So we were looking at land that was covered in trees. They had to come in and clear out, I'm sure that the surveyors did what surveyors do today. They cleared out corners so they could put pins in the ground, probably wooden stakes or rocks or something like that. And it's my belief that they cleared out enough property right in the center of the town where the new courthouse was to be built in order to hold the public auction, and held the public auction right in the town on that day. And all 48 of the town lots were either purchased or pledges made to take all 48 of the town lots on that day.
Do we have any idea who the auctioneer was?
I do not know who the auctioneer was. I've seen some writings on that, but the name escapes me right now. I'll try to look that up at some future time.
All right. And we might mention if the town square area, again, to give people a focus for, was where the Confederate Memorial used to be before that's where the original courthouse was built, is where the Confederate Memorial was when it was in the center of the street.
That's correct, John. When, of course, the courthouse was there, and I said they tore it down in about 1904. The circle, which was still there, the land where the courthouse stood, sat there empty. It may have had a tree on it or two until 1910, when they did erect the Confederate Memorial on that spot. and it stood there for another 54 years, I think, until 1964.
Right. And it's maybe worth mentioning, too, that it was moved over into the area where we think the temporary courthouse was located.
That's correct.
Okay. You also mentioned that sometimes property was assigned, sometimes it passed without a deed. We're not implying that anything illegal was going on here. What does that actually mean?
Well, it's hard to describe the process, but in 1841, when Caldwell County was formed, most pieces of property that traded hands, had deeds drawn up for them, were in the range of at least 50 to 60 acres, in some cases 200 to 400 acres, and even larger. These lots that we're looking at were more in the range of a 3/4 acre lot to no more than 2 acres. And people just didn't consider them to be that worthy of having a deed drawn up for. So they sold these lots, and basically everyone knew who owned them and who was building buildings on them. People would then either transfer their rights to the property by maybe bill of sale or whatever. So it was several years before the county either required that deeds be established for the lots, or the people decided that they needed deeds for the lots. Some of them began to show up in about the 1848 to 1849 era. Some of them didn't get deeds until almost 1900. But they were legally passed from one owner to the other by some honest means.
Right. And you've noticed, I'm sure, that as you've read some of those deeds, it sometimes gave the list of people who had owned it.
Yes, they did. You can go back to these deeds in the county clerk of court, the Register of Deeds office, and the deeds, many of the deeds will refer back to this original list of owners. I know that the deeds for the George Washington Finley Harper property that became the major Harper Park do list, in some cases, 4 or 5 owners on some of these lots.
But there are no actual deeds for them.
There are no actual deeds to them.
At least none recorded.
That's correct.
Right. Mm-hmm. It's also interesting that James Harper gave a portion of the land for the town and then bought a great deal of it back, or at least his heirs did.
Well, James Harper must have been a very giving man. He gave 30 acres of his property on the edge of his Fairfield plantation to Caldwell County for the purpose of getting the county seat of Lenoir erected. Then he came in and actually purchased one of the most expensive lots, where the Bank of Lenoir ended up being, and several other lots around town, and ended up with a great deal of property. So James Harper was he was a man who believed in Caldwell County, and he believed in the town of Lenoir.
It's also interesting that many of the purchasers of these lots, or the later owners, are people that we refer to as the good, solid citizens of Caldwell County. Many of them still have descendants here.
Sure. I know of quite a few people who are related to many of the people that we have mentioned in this program.
You know, Mike, we talked briefly about all 48 of the lots, and obviously we've not said everything that could be said about them.
No, this is a work in progress, and I'm working on a more detailed version, which will hopefully list all of the owners of the properties contained in the 48 town lots, and as many of the businesses and occupants that were present on the lots through the years that I can find.
I'm sure I can take the liberty of saying that you'd be glad to have any information that anybody can give you.
Sure, John. I'd love to have any information that people can come up with, especially any old pictures that people have, old buildings. They don't have to be even prior to 1900, although I'd love to have some from 1900. So any help you can give me would be greatly appreciated.
Well, I'm sure there are people out there who do have information that may not be even available in the public records that they could pass on to us, and they certainly can contact us at the museum or contact you directly, either one. But thank you for being present with us today and sharing this information with us. Now, a lot of historical information about the town of Lenoir in Caldwell County can be found at the Caldwell Heritage Museum. We're located at 112 Baden Street Southwest, behind the Davenport A+ School. And our hours of operation are 10 a.m. until 4:30 p.m. Tuesday through Friday, and 10 a.m. until 3 p.m. on Saturday. There's no admission charge, but we do accept donations. And my name is John Hawkins, and thank you for watching Caldwell County Today.